off point for us for one or two things that you learned from those extraordinary monks that when we go back into Goldman Sachs, when we go into fill in the blank, professional services organization or teachers or whatever you do as parents,
I think there's several things. I mean, I think the thing that first pops to my mind is something I repeat endlessly, that it's in our own self-interest to forget our self-interest. And the more successfully you forget your selfish motivations, the more successful you become.
Because you talk about selflessness and service, right?
Right, service and selflessness. That's I mean, this is my projection. The monks don't talk about service and selflessness. I invented that, but that's the words that I put to what they do. But they're so, and I said it's not that strange if you think I came up through sales, and any great salesman knows or should know that the more he forgets about his product, forgets about his commissions, forgets about his quota, and fanatically focuses on serving his customers' needs, the quota takes care of itself. Everything that we think that we value is a trailing indicator. It's a byproduct of the same thing with leadership, which is to me is what is the fatal flaw? Most people get into leadership because they want to get promoted. They don't realize that the fastest way for you to get promoted is to get somebody else promoted. Your job as a leader is not to get promoted, it's to get other people promoted. And the irony is, or the paradox is, that the more people you get promoted, the faster you'll get promoted. And and the same thing with a corporation. Lou Mobley, we haven't talked about, but he was my mentor. He founded the IBM Executive School. I ended up, through a long story, living in his house with him and becoming his protege. He started the IBM Executive School. And he said, the purpose of a corporation is not to make a profit. The purpose of a corporation is to share value, to produce value. And profit is the measuring stick that we use to say whether we're achieving our goals or not. It's not the goal itself. It's the trailing indicator. The more a corporation forgets about profit and instead fanatically focuses on providing service to other people, the people who need it, the more profit they're going to make. And that leads into the other big thing that is that I learned from the monks, that is I call aim past the target.
Aim past the target.
Aim past the target. That we all know that if you're going to play basketball, they say aim for the back of the rim. If you're putting your ball, aim for the back of the cup. And in archers, you're supposed to aim past the target. And so if you want to if you want profit, aim past profit. If you want to get promoted, aim past your own promotion. Aim towards somebody else's promotion. I've been absolutely obsessed with what you might call self-transcendence, spirituality, personal development. Pick your words for it. That was all I cared about. And everything else. So I've never considered myself, even in my remotest dreams, as a businessman who hangs out with monks once in a while.
But actually, it's an interesting distinction because it could be a cool thing to tell everyone at the club, but this is really more a way of being for you.
I was always a spiritual person who happened to be in business, or a spiritual person who happened to be hanging out with, spending time with the monks, or whatever it must be. The personal development stuff was always the absolute center of my life, and I attribute everything that has come out of that to being able to keep my mind higher on higher purpose.
So I'm going to ask a question, and what you've just been talking about, aim past the target, is maybe part of the answer. But many of us here, we're in jobs that are intense. There's a lot of pressure. Someone always coming up behind us. There's inevitable business cycles, and we may not feel a lot of latitude. And I do hold up this Bible and Wall Street Journal at the beginning of every GLF. But a lot of us say, but how do I do that? I work in a profoundly secular workplace. I don't dare make a peep about my spiritual beliefs. What thoughts do you have for someone who's in that kind of space? And they're not the owner, they're not the founder, they're perhaps very senior, but it could be a lonely place, and we could feel spiritually dry there.
Yes, well, Americans especially have this idea. I mean, what I hear all the time is I can't. So some of these people say, no, you won't. You won't. I said to a close friend of mine who was a very spiritual guy, and he's struggling with a lot of this kind of stuff. And I said, listen, hey, you have a really good marriage, you have a wonderful wife, and I said, downsize. Maybe if you have to become substitute teachers, you're not going to starve. Sell the gazillion-dollar house, move into an apartment in Poughkeepsie, and work as substitute teachers. And God forbid, maybe your kids would have to go to a regular school. So that, to me, is the first thing, and that ends up being. And if you're not grounded in your spirituality, if you're not grounded in something bigger that matters more to you than that, then you're not going to be able to do that.
One of the folks I interviewed, I haven't had he spoke to my students, and I asked him sort of a similar question: what advice would you give to graduating from this fine institution, the world's your oyster? And the first thing he said is build a moat. It was Jimmy Dunn. Build a moat. And they're like, moat? What are you talking about? I said, yeah, like a castle has a moat around it. What's a moat do? It protects you from invaders. And he said, buy as early as you can as a couple. If you're married, buy a house. Don't stretch too much. And I'm going to give you the worst tax advice and the best life advice. Pay it off in 7 years. Chances are that you're going to work in a job that'll make more money than most people because of you're a little bit ahead of the race by coming and graduating from the institution you are. Pay it off as quickly as you can. And then from that point, anyone who says, who tries to do something that's compromising, that you've got your mortgage taken care of. That's your moat. You're saying that you can downsize. There are options. You have lots of just practical things so you don't get ahead of your skis and get entrapped with. It's so easy to do in this and neighboring zip codes to feel trapped when we're maybe, to your point, we're not as trapped as we think, although it can feel oppressive at times.
The other flip side of that is that I just have to say, and all I can do is tell you this intellectually, because I can't live your life for you. I don't want to either. But every time I summoned the courage to just do the right thing, it always worked out. And that's necessarily in the short term. I tell a story in my...
Can you think of an example?
Yeah, the story I tell, I moved down to North Carolina. I wasn't actually working at the time. The company, I went down there to take a flyer on a startup, and it ended up flaking out, and so I wasn't even working at the time. And I get a telephone call from an old friend of mine from the cable TV business, and his name was Joe Tossick. Joe calls me up and he says, "Oh yeah, I got this exciting thing. We're going to put the band back together." He said, "I got $150 million to take UPI out of bankruptcy and turn it around. And I want you to be my number 2 man. I want you to be my executive vice president," he said, and he gave me this huge salary and all the perks and all that kind of stuff. But he says, you got to move to Washington, D.C. And I said, "I can't move to Washington, D.C., Joe." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I just gave these talks at North Carolina State University, and these kids walked up afterwards, and they were impressed by what I had to say about spirituality, and they asked me to coach them. And I said, well, start a little student club. Let's get a room, and there was 4 of them. I said, I'll come over on Thursdays, and I'll share with whatever wisdom I've been able to get down. And I said, so I can't move because I promised these kids." And he said, "What? 4 snot-nosed kids? They won't last 2 weeks," which they would, and I knew that. He said, "They're not going to." He said, "You're going to turn down the job of a lifetime and everything." He said, "Come on up here." He said, we got Northeastern University, American University, Catholic University. He said, Georgetown. He said, "Whatever that stuff is you do, you can do it up here." And I said, "Joe," I said, "No, better yet." I said, "Move UPI to Raleigh." He said, "Molly will never go." And Molly's his wife, and I do Molly really well. He said, "Molly's never going to go for that." And I said, "Joe, we got lots of women down here."
That's funny.
If my students are interchangeable, then maybe your wife. Of course, we just cracked up laughing and we hung up. And I knew when I hung up that phone, I was not happy. Not only, and it's true, not only did I turn down that job of a lifetime, but I also put a bullet in.
I'm struck by that how often the counterintuitive decision is the right long-term play. When everyone else says, "Oh, this is a no-brainer, this is what you do," but the counterintuitive decision, I think the whole Christian proposition, it's all upside down.
Well, Father Francis used to always say down at the monastery, he said, you have to understand that Christianity at heart is a countercultural philosophy. It's a countercultural philosophy. If you're going to really be a practicing Christian, you're going to get a lot of friction out of it. It's not the popularity thing, and that's one of the things I got at. Not in Christian, I didn't mention it specifically in the Forbes article, but I said, every time I've turned down so many sure things, safe bet, the obvious thing to do, and who do you turn to for advice? Because if you turn to anybody for advice, what are they going to take the damn job? They're going to say the same thing Joe said to me, So it's a really hard, you really have to, and this is the third thing I'd say about the question that you just asked. You need a community. You need people, you need teachers, spiritual directors, community that, like the monks have, so that you have people to turn to, that you have people who are going to reinforce your desire to do the right thing and aren't going to tell you to take the shortcut and do what everybody else is going to do and that kind of, who don't have the fear. And the final thing that I would say along those lines, because I just said it's courage, but it's also, what did the psalm say? Make justice your sacrifice, trust in the Lord. You've got to have that deep conviction that there is a God, and this is going to turn out the way it's supposed to, And the thing I think that makes this book is the most compelling for me, or gives me the most satisfaction in a lot of ways, is because I chronicle how I used all the same things to build my business. So don't tell me it's easy for you to say, and the monks have it all easy, and No. Read the book, because I'm telling you exactly how I made the same kinds of decisions, and it worked out for me too. So this is a case in point of how you can do it.
And you make the distinction between having, and of course there's your corporate organizational mission. I'm sure Sacred Heart has one as well. And then there's your personal mission that many of us have an opportunity through perhaps a spiritual retreat or a church activity or even a business retreat to what's your personal mission. A lot of younger folks revise that. But you make the distinction between having a mission and living a mission.
Right.
Talk about that.
Well, it's what motivates you every single day first thing when you get out of bed. I mean, what is, in my book, Lou Mobley said the most important question that a business needs to constantly ask is, what is the business of the business? What is the business of the business? Why are we in business? What are we trying to accomplish here? He said only that kind of introspection can keep you from sticking to green widgets when everybody's going to blue widgets. So you keep asking yourself the question. But really, I realized that when I was just a kid studying with him, that's also just a who am I question. That's just a collective version of the who am I question. What am I about? I said when we started our business, not only we started $2,000, and $2,000 was because that's how much money it cost to open an office and get telephones for and my partner said, we don't have a business plan, but we're smart guys, we'll figure out something to do. And that was our business plan. But the first thing we did is I said we didn't know what we were going to do, but we absolutely knew who we wanted to be. So the first thing we did was sit down and write down our values. Who are we? What do we stand for? What aren't we going to put up with? And we had a list of these values that we wanted to live by. And to me, that always should come first. That's aiming past the target. That's starting with putting your heart in the right place, and then letting the fundamentals of the business flow out of that.
Well, the monks have, that you write about also in your books, the monks have, at least at Mepkin Abbey, sort of a three-part move that any corporation, no matter how big or small, can, and even if you're somewhere in the middle and you're not the one calling all the shots, one part is to have a mission. The second, it's an organizational mission, personal mission. The second is individual transformation, which we could call growth, development. And the third is community. Right. And so they sort of interweave these three. And you could argue that mission has a theistic, a godly component to why does God have me here? How am I meant to transform or grow through this experience? And how am I meant to be a healthy member of the community? It's really a heck of a little triangle, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think the thing that I also have enjoyed about this book is I stick my neck out. I say in the end of the first chapter, I said, here I say everybody thinks, first of all, that everybody has their own mission, or that it's relative. Everybody, who's to say what, And I said in the book, in the Business Secrets, I said, dare I say it dogmatically.
Bashful as you are.
Yeah, bashful as I am. I enjoyed that so much right now. Because everybody hates dogma, so I'm going to use it desperately. Dare I say dogmatically, we're all have the same mission. And that mission is to be transformed from a selfish to a selfless human being. That's why we're all here.
From selfish to selfless.
So to be transformed from every baby starts out screaming, mine, mine, mine. you know. And little by little, we become a little bit more selfless. You know, even a serial killer will probably, you know, will tell you what time it is if you ask him on the street. So, you know, and so being transformed from us, and this is what the hero, and I use the model of the hero's journey, that the whole hero's journey, the arc of the hero's journey, is to be transformed from a selfish to a selfless person. I mean, and the whole formula is in, you know, in the New Testament when Paul says, you know, the Paul's hymn when he says Jesus, even though he was God, he didn't come in the appearance of God. He came, you know, he emptied himself. He says he emptied himself even to the point of a humble servant to death on the cross. This is, you know, the Greek word for this is kenosis. It's the self-emptying. So in a theological way, that's another way of just saying that we're here to become empty, to be emptied of our selfishness and our selflessness, to become one as much as far as we can get to becoming one with God.
Which goes back to a counterintuitive in a world where we're taught to be all we can be, and it's so much focus on the self, which has healthy components to be sure, that it could be perverted into a distortion of a faithful life.
I just came from the conference last week on the dignity of work with the Napa Institute in Washington, and I actually got talking to one of the speakers there because everybody was talking about, you know, the dignity of work, and I said, you know, the thing that is missing from a lot of this discussion, I said, is the idea of community. You know, yes, it's important that we treat each individual person with dignity, and no matter whether they're, you know, washing the dishes or making $1 billion, they're all state. But on the other hand, it isn't all about me either. You know, there's times when I should, you know, forget about myself in the service of the overall mission of the organization that I'm in.
Would you tell the Rolling Stones story, please? Been in all. Any people like the Rolling Stones here? I hope there might. Okay, so tell that story, then we'll jump in for some Q&A.
Well,
you can give us the short and sweet version.
I was a fanatical Rolling Stones fan, so were a bunch of my friends. In 1972, the Rolling Stones were doing a concert tour.
Exile on Main Street.
Exile on Main Street tour. And they came to Pittsburgh. And I got to quickly tell you the story. I mean, this is one of those things where just, you know, asking what happened. So me and my friend decided to get tickets to the Rolling Stones. So he goes down to this record store where they sold tickets like 6 months before the Stones come. And the guy laughed at it. I said, what do you think? You're not going to come walk right in here and buy Stones tickets. He said, they're going to go on sale like 48 hours before the concert, and it's going to be a lottery, and that's how they're going to get them, you know? So we said, all right. So as we're walking out, this guy walks over and goes, psst. And I said, yeah. He said, you want Stones tickets? I said, yeah, I want Stones. He says, write to this address and send a check for $6.50. That was all they were back then. $6.50 for the tickets, you know? So I go home and I fill out a check for, like, you know, we didn't have a lot of money, but it was probably about 8 or 9 tickets. And so I write this check. I send in about a week later. I get a letter back that says limit 4. So me and my friend and my brother all sent in for 400. So we got like 12 tickets. And I didn't hear anything for months. And then all of a sudden I see the check is cashed. And then like 1 week before the concert, before the actual tickets went on sale, the letter comes. There's my tickets to the Stones concert. And I'm really excited, so I called the Civic Arena in Pittsburgh and I said, he said, where are my tickets? He said, what are the numbers? And I said, I gave him them. He says, you're in the first row. So I get this, we go and I get one of these big Uncle Sam hats, because Mick Jagger had worn one at the Get Your Ya-Ya's tour, which was the previous tour. So I'm sitting in the front, sitting in the front row of the Stones ticket, and all of a sudden Rhodey comes over right before the concert. He says, Mick wants to wear your hat. So
And for many of us, when we see a public figure that comes, we just hear the highs. There's this linear approach to the top, however we define that. And you've not had a linear approach. You've had ups and downs. Would you mind just tell us about the family you were born into? It's a big family, isn't it? And
right.
Just so we know you a bit as a person, and then where you came from, and then we'll talk about how you got where you.
No, I come from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am the oldest of 8 children. Yes, we're Catholic. I spent half my life. People stopped asking me that recently. I don't know whether it's not politically correct, but are you Catholic? Are you Catholic? And no, I wasn't born in August. Those are the 2 questions that I spent my life.
And was your family sort of practicing Catholic?
Oh yes,
right?
yes. And I was an altar boy, and I went to St. Simon and Jude. And my father and mother were both very active in the parish because St. Simon and Jude was just starting out. My mother had 7 boys in a row.
Wow. So she needed prayers.
She needed prayers, and there was always 2 gallons of milk in our refrigerator at all times. And then she finally had a daughter, so I have a baby sister. So that's how I grew up, and I think the first big thing that I look back at my life. I think one of the most important things is that I don't know how you do it. People sometimes talk about that. Where do you get that inner confidence? And when I look back at my childhood, the one thing I had going for me, because we didn't have any money. There was 10 of us in a 950 square foot house. Think about that.
I'm doing the math per person. How many square feet?
With a party line and 1 bathroom and a kitchenette.
But party lines were just early Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. But I always had, an inner confidence that I remember one of the first things, and I've written about this, is that I loved Christmas when I was a little kid. So when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I wanted to go Christmas caroling. So I talked the boys in the neighborhood to go Christmas caroling with me. And then when I went out there at night when it got dark, they all chickened out and they didn't want to go Christmas caroling with me. So I came back and I went to my house, and my dad worked for the railroad. He was in human resources, but he worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. And the only flashlight we had in the house was one of those big railroad lanterns. So I got that big railroad lantern, and the reason I know how young I was is because I couldn't hold it. I had to put it on my shoulder. And I took the Christmas caroling book, and I went out on it. We had a we lived in a cul-de-sac. It was 15 mile per hour speed limit. There was no traffic to speak of. And I parked myself in the very center of the street, and I went Christmas caroling all by myself. Wow. So I walked about a quarter of a mile, screaming a little town of Bethlehem at the top of my lungs. I turned around and walked back the quarter mile. And I remember even at that age, my attitude, I was miserable. I was crying. And nobody came out, not even a porch light went on. But I look back at that now, and I think, and when I got there, my mother, of course, I thought I was pulling one over on my mother, but of course she was onto it, and she was waiting for me in the driveway when I got back, and I started crying, and she was hugging me and everything. And I think that the thing that was the 2 things I think when I look back on that is, number one, I think I realized even at that age that if I was going to get anywhere in life, I couldn't wait for other people. That if I was going to do it, I had to stick my neck out and do it. And the saddest thing about it was very lonely. It was going to be very lonely. And I think I sensed that from the very beginning.
May I ask, what was the one essence of what made that so transformative?
Well, I think there was 2 big elements. One is I got my butt kicked. I got my butt kicked. In every area. I was a golden boy growing up, going to St. Simon and Jude. I was the captain of the football team, and I was
another level of competition.
I was hanging on by my fingernails to stay at Hotchkiss, and by all intents, they probably should have thrown me out. I was a lousy student anyway. But the fact is, I think I trace my introspection to that experience, which is a tremendous blessing. Because when you're going through a lot of suffering, you always end up asking the question, you try like crazy to say it's all their fault. I'm miserable because the school was screwed up and all these other boys are crazy and I'm the only sane person in the universe. But you don't carry that very. I call it the superiority-inferiority complex. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Friday you're superior, and that's why you're having so much trouble. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays you're a loser, and that's why you're having so much trouble. And trying to sort out which one of those 2, I think. But the other thing that was absolutely.
By the way, I think that applies to the business world. I think when we go into our offices where sometimes we know we're like, wow, we got it, and other times some folks call it the imposter syndrome. Like, what am I doing here? I don't deserve to be in this company. We either think we're the best or the worst. It's a life
absolutely. And so I started becoming introspective as a result of trauma. And so it was the trauma that was the blessing.
Wait, could you repeat that?
The trauma was the blessing.
You're starting to sound like St. Paul. No, I'm serious. I mean, in this day of sort of pleasure, seeking pleasure, having pleasure, being happy, being fulfilled, and there's this odd and sometimes irritating Christian message which says in suffering sometimes you grow and you can become better through it. Not to glorify suffering, but it has a purpose.
Yes, in Zen, which I later studied, they have something called the red hot cannonball of Zen. You're supposed to, there's the great faith and the great doubt. The great faith says there is a God and there is a sense to all this, and it all makes sense, And the great doubt is this is just we're just worms and food for worms. And so again, it's Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, Tuesdays, Thursdays the Zen master is supposed to keep the tension. You're supposed to stay in that tension point, like as if you had a red hot cannonball stuck in your throat. And to me, Hotchkiss became kind of like that because I wanted to go home. I mean, I was on the phone, burning up the phone. I want to go home. I want to go back home and be a big shot in a small pond, But I was between the irresistible force and the immovable object. The immovable object was the school wasn't going to change for me. I don't understand that. They wouldn't change for me. And then the irremovable object, my parents wouldn't let me come home.
Let's fast forward a little bit. My point about your life has not been linear. At a certain point, you've shared you had you walked away from church. You're an atheist for a while. To the extent you're comfortable, share a little bit what happened and how you came out of it, or you might even say how God pulled you out of it.
Well, I was thinking about that in preparation. There's a couple of books that I really like. One of them is a guy by the name of Joseph Chilton Pierce, and the other one is Joseph Campbell. And I think of that in my life was that another red hot cannonball situation was, I think Joseph Chilton Pierce says, somewhere along the age of 23 or 24, I forget the age he says, most people have the sense of, is this it? Is this all there is? I've been drunk, I've had sex, I've eaten at a good restaurant, is this it? And the other part of it is that Joseph Campbell says that at some point in time, people who are going to set out on a spiritual journey are seized by the idea. They're just seized by the idea that, wait a second, there's something so much more. It's at the tip of my tongue. I can't really articulate what it is, but there's a reality that's so much bigger than dry cleaning tickets and plans for dinner. I mean, something. There's got to be something, and I think that sums up, because the idea of there's got to be something more was kind of the depressing feeling that I had that there wasn't anything more.
And you use the word depressing, if you don't mind me going into personal space, but you struggled with depression.
Yes.
Up until a point. Would you share that with us?
Well, I started suffering with depression from the time I was, I think, late adolescence on. I think at Hotchkiss I first started suffering.
So sort of a true clinical depression. Not just feeling blue or something.
And my attitude was to just fight through it. I just started treating it like grit my teeth, keep hanging in there, it'll lift, and I'll feel better. And that worked for many years. And I stayed on my spiritual path, and I was working with college students, but I moved down to North Carolina. And I had started my own company and I was working with some Duke students, and they talked me into going skydiving. And as I said in my book, I said I was brave enough to jump out of an airplane, but not brave enough to tell them I was too damn old to be jumping on airplanes. So I jumped out of an airplane and just crushed my ankle. It was compound fractured the fibula and the tibia of my ankle, and I ended up in the hospital for a week. But what I was completely unprepared for was that I started having massive panic attacks. Just coming like in waves and crescendos of these panic attacks. And I'm laying there and I can't figure out what's going on. And I'm talking to myself and saying, hey, this is a broken ankle, that you are going to get well, and all that kind of stuff. And then suddenly it hit me, like the third day, it finally hit me that no, you're not panicking about your ankle now. It's that someday soon, they're going to come in and say, I'm sorry, Mr. Turak, there's nothing more we can do for you but make you comfortable. And then what are you going to do? And then that released the real pain. It was my own mortality that I was confronting. And then the top of that, all this work I'd done with teachers and prayer and all this stuff that I did, where was it when I needed it? It was not there. All I cared about, and it was very humiliating. to admit this to myself. Oh, just get the doctor in here. I want to know what the doctor has to say. And people, my friends of mine, spiritual friends of mine would come in and want to read from the Bible to me, or they'd want to talk to me. Get out of here. Get the doctor. Don't feed me that stuff. I want to know what and of course, what are you going to do when the doctor can't help you, man? So I finally got out of the hospital, and this launched me into a 2-year dark night of the soul. After I got out of the hospital, after a week, the panic died down, but the despair and depression just descended. It's like I couldn't fight my way out of it anymore, and I started into a 2-year spiral. And it's something that I should write a whole book about, or part of a book, because it was also punctuated by incredibly paranormal, really strange kind of stuff. I'll tell you just one real quick thing. Is about 6 months into this, 3 months or so into it, I'm back trying to rehab, and I'm at the gym, and I'm trying to work at, this is what I'd worked in the past, work really hard and just...
And you're running a business the whole time.
I'm running 2 businesses.
Which ended up being, we'll come back to the business side of your life, massively successful.
Right, but I'm trying to do this, and I'm going to the gym trying to work through this despair and depression. And I'm working on the stair climber one day, and all of a sudden I hear a voice say, "Not feeling too good, are y'all?" And I whirl around, and there's this guy that he's my gym friend, the guy you see every day at the gym, and just say hi bye. Kids call them hi bye friends, and that's all. So at first, I remember my first thought was none of your business or something, but I was just too tired. I was so exhausted, and I just went like that. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "In AA, we call it the soul." Oh, he said, "No." He said, first thing he said was, "It feels like your heart's broken, don't it?" And he was a really rednecky kind of guy from North Carolina. He had real long hair. He's about 40. He said, "It feels like your heart's broken." And all of a sudden, he'd given words to the way I'd been feeling for 4 months. And I just nodded again. It was exactly the way I felt. He said, "Yeah, in AA, we call it the soul hole."
The soul hole.
He said, "I'm here to tell you that you're in for 2 years of so much hell, you're going to be wishing it was never born. But you're going to get through it, and God's going to be waiting for you on the other side.
Wow.
And you're going to love yourself a whole hell of a lot more than you do right now."
Wow.
And the man disappeared, and I've never seen him again. To this day, I've never seen him, even though I went back to that gym every day after that. And almost 2 years to the day.
Is that when you went to Mepkin Abbey?
Well, actually, about a couple weeks after that, I get a telephone call from one of my students at Duke, another one of my students. He hadn't taken me skydiving. And he said, "I just wanted to let you know that at least one of your students took your advice." I said, "What advice?" He said, "Do something meaningful with your summer vacation instead of just chasing girls and getting drunk." I said, "I don't remember saying that, but good." And he said, "Well, I'm at Mepkin Abbey. I'm at a Trappist monastery in South Carolina for the summer as a monastic guest." And his name is Josh Skidlarek, and it was just something the way he was talking, the place I could feel he was coming from. And I just blurted out, "I want to come." And he said, "When?" And I said, "Now." And all of a sudden I realized it was Wednesday and I'm at work. And I said, "Well, this weekend." He said, "Well, let me go talk to Brother John." That was the first time I ever heard Brother John's name. And he came back about 5 minutes later and said, "They said, come on down this weekend." And I went that weekend, and the weekend after that, and the weekend after that, and the weekend after that. And then I applied to become a monastic guest, and they accepted me, and I went down for 3 weeks at Christmas, and that's when this event happened during that dark night. But I went 2 years of struggle, and then finally I have no other ways of putting it, but I had actually it happened on Good Friday. I was working with a therapist, and it's a long story, but I'll just cut to the end. On Good Friday, I really hit bottom, and I called up I was working with this therapist, a Christian therapist up in Baltimore, and I called up my business, and I said, my partners, and they were my spiritual buddies, so I could talk candidly with them. And I said, "Eric," I said, "I'm not going to be back Monday, like you were expecting me." And he said, "Well, when are you going to be back?" And the strange thing about this whole week that I went through when I was up there in Baltimore was that anytime a question was posed, either by me or by the therapist, and those were the only 2 people that I talked to, me and my therapist, the answer would come back, "Thus says the Lord." And really, really just comes from the very baseline. So as soon as he said, "When are you going to be back?" I just heard myself say, "I'm not coming back. I'm going to die or be institutionalized."
That's pretty heavy.
Yeah, and then I finally passed out and that night and the next day I went in to see the therapist, and thinking very much, absolutely convinced. I don't know if you've ever had one of those dreams where you're in a line and you're waiting to be executed. You're going to be guillotined, you're going to be hanged.
Fortunately, I have not had one of those.
I appreciate you
sharing. You hold on to that.
And you have this sense that you better get out of line, but you never do. There's something inevitable about it. You just have to stay in line, and you have to just. And so I went to the therapist the next morning after having this horrific dream, which I won't get into right now, which I thought was the absolute nadir, the bottom of the barrel. I said, I'm going to tell him this dream, and that's going to be the breaking point, and he's going to call the 911, and they're going to take me away, and that's the end. But it never occurred to me, I still have to go see him. This is my destiny. That's where I'm going. But instead, what happened was I had this unbelievably cataclysmic spiritual experience in his office. And really, the next thing I remember, it was Easter Sunday, and we're at his church, and we're standing outside, and Mass is over, and the bells are ringing, and the sun is shining, and I was reborn. And as I told you, that was 1998, and I haven't had a day's depression since, or I haven't had a moment's depression since. And I told David, I said, I was asked because of this book, somebody was interviewing me, and they asked these questions, and they asked me, what is my proudest achievement? And I said, my proudest achievement happened a couple of years ago when I was going to the gym, and there was a guy there handing out towels. And which is kind of interesting because with the gym I go to, they don't have a guy to hand out towels. There's a stack of towels, and you take a towel. But this one day in the 20 years that I've been going to this gym, this guy was handing out towels. So he hands me a towel, and as I go to take the towel, he locks it with me and he says, "If you could be anywhere doing anything, where would you be doing what right now?" He says like that, and without even a moment's hesitation, I said, "I'd be right here, right now, doing this." And as I walked away with my towel towards the thing, I realized I had tears in my eyes. And I realized that answer had come from the absolute very bottom of my being. That I was exactly who I wanted to be, where I wanted to be, how I wanted to be. Or as we were talking about, a good friend of mine told me one time that all he really wanted out of his spiritual path was to hear that voice that said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And that's the way I felt. And that's the way I've felt ever since 1998. So.
That's just, I appreciate it because it's a deeply personal story. I appreciate you sharing it. And these two books that we're holding, they're bookends, and literally and metaphorically. So, Brother John is the story of your experience in the monastery, being very moved and touched by Brother John in this Trappist monastery. This is taking the observations you had there. It's called Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks. One CEO's quest for meaning and authenticity. So this is part of your personal journey, and this is well, how can we? These businesses, these orders, monastic orders, have been around for 1,000, 1,500 years. They're amazingly successful. The model works, and how can we? Which is sort of the GLF question. How do we take this into our Monday lives?
Mm-hmm.